Coming up today on Locked On at Texas Tech, we get to some updated win totals across the Big 12 Conference and why I am in need of personal growth in one very specific way.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And thanks as always for making us your first listen with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you, kicking off another week. Hope everybody had a great weekend. And today we're going to dive into some win projections for the Big 12 Conference as we continue to look ahead to the 2024 season, and also want to get into some of the bigger picture outside of the conference as it relates to chances for multiple entries or a single entry into the college football playoff, and something that I am working on personally, but it's going to require some growth from myself as a Red Raider. I'll explain coming up in just a moment, but let's dive into these updated Big 12 win projections first. I'll put it on the screen for those watching on YouTube and run them down for those listening in via podcast. Here we go. It starts off at the top of the list with a 9.5 for K-State and Utah as far as a projected win total. At 8 wins, you've got the Kansas Jayhawks. Coming up next at 7.5, you got a crowded group with Arizona, Central Florida, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, Texas Christian, and Texas Tech. At 6.5, you've got West Virginia. 5.5 for Cincinnati, Baylor, and Colorado. 4.5 for Arizona State and BYU. And 4 precious wins projected for the Houston Cougars. Before we extrapolate to what it could mean for the postseason, Chris, what do you think about some of these numbers tied to these teams?
Yeah, and these are updated. This is, I think something that Vegas puts out there, and then they'll update it, tweak it as different things happen. And essentially, you can place a wager. You're going to go over or under, but they're setting the win total, and that kind of gives you an idea on where these teams are going to fall according to the experts. Some of it's based on schedule that you're playing. Some of it's based on, they just signed a new quarterback that's a stud. I mean, whatever it may be. Or their coach just got fired and all the like. There's a variety of different reasons how you formulate these. But as I look at it, to localize it, the top 3 teams on this list are not on your schedule. You've got in the 5.5 to 4.5 win category, there's 5 teams listed in that 5.5 to 4.5 category. You play 4 of the 5. Hence the reason why I think a lot of people feel like this is not a perfect schedule for you, but it's favorable for Texas Tech this year. I think as I look at the win totals, I think it is interesting to note that West Virginia is maybe can play. Neil Brown can play the lack of respect card again, and so I'm clear. What he had an issue with is how he was projected by the media and the poll last year. This is Vegas. This is a bit different. At some point here in the coming weeks, we're going to get a list from 1 to 16 on how the media thinks that these teams will finish. So you can't lump them all together into tiers. You've got to pick a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, all the way to 8th, 9th, and so on. And the Red Raiders, based on this, I see to where if it falls how this is listed, I mean, you could be picked in the 7, 8, 9, 10 range based on that, which is going to be, I think, a bit of a shock to the system. I think if you see 8th, 9th, 10th range, depending on how your view of things. So that's how some of my initial thoughts when I looked at it. I also think there's not a lot. This is a bit of a logjam here. My final thought was, when I look at it, I see good here and I see bad here. And I can explain if you want me to, but yeah. I think it's interesting to note that this could be, you give a big hug to this and you say, this is awesome. But you could also go, ooh, that's that's not so good, folks. And so there's a variety of ways to look at it when you look at something like this.
Yeah. Take me into that part because I 7.5. We've talked about that number quite a bit because it is going to be. I mean, I think it's a great projection for Texas Tech because it is going to be right sort of in the meat of where I think most, if there is such a thing, reasonable fans, maybe Landon, wanting to predict, do I go 8-4? Do I go 7-5? And look, like we've pointed out on other shows, with no Longhorns, no Sooners on the schedule, are you bold enough to maybe crank it up a tick and say 9-3? But what are you seeing here as far as what you describe as a good and bad?
Well, and so I'm clear. I'm describing that as an entire league when I look at the total thing, not necessarily from a Texas Tech standpoint, the good and the bad. And it's funny because you mentioned Texas not being on here. You've beat them a couple times. You should have beat them more than that. But what's funny is they've kind of been extremely average over the last decade. Yeah, last year they were good. There's been some glimpses where they're better than not, but they've been for their standard or whatever, they've been pretty average.
Well,
and you're just one that hasn't been able to take advantage of them.
That is the truth. That's what I wanted to point out because it hurts me so deeply. Everybody else has been able to take advantage of it, and you did get a couple of them. But I mean, I don't need. You can run down the list.
I mean,
everybody
Kansas State
else
beats them all the time.
Around.
Oklahoma State beats them all the time. TCU had a phenomenal record against them all the time when Gary Patterson was there. And yet you're just floundering. And this is the reason why you've had this average kind of decade too, because, like a lot of folks, you couldn't take advantage of some of these programs that are down. So anyway, that's a different conversation. But as far as like the totality of the league, I look at it as in, man, you're missing a headliner, you're missing a no-brainer, your chances to have 1, 2, or possibly 3 entries into the college football playoff based on the way that this would look are hurt, because you need some teams to go over the 9.5 win total at least to get into the playoff. Now, somebody's going to get in because of the automatic part, but in all reality, you've got to be in that 10 or 11 win category, I think, at minimum, to get in, to get a nod in. We're already hearing other leagues posturing 9-3 or 11-1. You tell me, which league are they in? We know 9-3's in, folks. The 11-1, sorry, you didn't make it. That's what we're all staring at. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news there, but this is the reality of it. And I would hope that Texas Tech will be in those conversations at some point. When you're sitting there at 11-1, 10-2, and I guess theoretically they would have played a 13th game as well, because they would have been in the conference championship at some point. But that's the harsh reality that you're staring at. And I would like to think that Texas Tech will be in those conversations. So I would say that's why, and I don't know if I'm skipping ahead here, Cowan. If I am, just throw up a
No, you're doing all the good.
Tell me to stop. But this is why I think more so than ever before, because you do have an expanded playoff, it would really behoove the league. And it's not that if you root for them or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you root for. What will happen will happen. However, if West Virginia beats Penn State in the non-conference, because we've all poked and prodded, and we've thought it was funny when Iowa beats Iowa State. Matt Campbell gets real frustrated, and he's walking out of the stadium, and somebody's giving it to him. Matt Campbell's glaring back at the guy, and from afar we've like, yeah, Matt, you're not so fancy there, are you? There in your Cyclone shoes. But now I think there's tangible meaning in some of these non-conference games to where it benefits the Big 12. Iowa State beating Iowa and then you beating Iowa State is meaningful. This is how they will track it now that we're including a lot more teams into the conference, the college football playoff. West Virginia beating Penn State, and if you beat West Virginia, that is now very tangible. Whereas before, it's, yeah, we're all going to, the 6-6 or 8-4 bowl. It doesn't really matter on some of the other stuff, but at the top end, anyways, it is going to be meaningful. So I just would say that some of the non-conference results really will pay dividends now, or not, or not, and it will hurt your league or really help it. At least initially, this is what we think until we get a body of work that says, no, it really doesn't factor in, or they're going to screw the Big 12 no matter what. And this is where people may land on anyways. We're just allowing one in. We're not getting two. But for right now, maybe the naivete of me feels like that you need to be really good in the non-conference, because this is the only way you can kind of have some sort of say so or flex or whatever with some of your non-conference games. If you're Texas Tech, you can't lose to Washington State. Again, if you have hopes of big goals, and I think everybody does, and you losing to Washington State will indirectly affect a variety of folks that want to look at a win over Tech being more meaningful. I mean, so I think people get what I'm saying here, but man, Calvin, I've never really been like this. I root against TCU all the time. I just do.
You're making some good points, and I don't know that I like it.
First, today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else, and it does it all while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within only 24 hours. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
You're making some good points, and I don't know that I like it, because this is the personal growth portion of the program. I did not come up this way. I wonder how you feel about it being a little easier to possibly do this now. Now, you mentioned Texas Christian, but for me growing up, I mean, I'll just say this. There has never been a day on God's green earth that I rooted for the Texas Longhorns or the Aggies to win a damn thing. I don't care if it's Russia, Iraq, whoever on the other sideline. I ain't pulling for those guys. Now, growing up, Oklahoma was irrelevant to me. They weren't even on my radar to hate enough. I know they're the blue blood, but I just never carried that type of same feeling for them. Big 8 football was not really in my purview either. So there was a lot of that impacted some apathy or indifference, I guess, towards the Sooners and some of that collection. But Longhorns, Aggies, never. Texas Christian, Baylor obviously have been lesser on the list, at least for me personally, because for the most part, they don't have many people that care one way or another what they're doing. And you kind of need that back and forth to really gin up like a good old fist fight or battery tossing at the Municipal Coliseum, or a field goal being shoved into a visitor's section, and Aggie on Aggie violence. I mean, you need something, you need somebody to return fire, for it really to get worked up to that type of sports hate. But I didn't really have it for them. Oklahoma State, like new members of the Big 12, and I don't mean new, but whenever the conference first was established and you have the Big 8 transplants and we all get together, I just never cooked up that much for them. I always want to beat them, obviously. But I guess I would say personally, I have a lot less trouble now maybe trying to root for the conference. Now, again, it's not instinctively my first reaction because it's Texas Tech versus everybody. I hate everybody and everybody hates us, or they don't even think about us, whatever they would say. But that's generally the way I've been. But I think I would probably speculate that I could find it a lot easier to pull for some of these programs in a non-conference setting than I ever could for the Longhorns or the Aggies. It would just be physically impossible and repulsive to even consider the thought. What do you think personally as a fan?
Yeah, and I would tell people, hey, root for whoever you want. The chips will fall.
Sure, this is not a command.
Where you sit on your couch or what socks you're wearing, it doesn't have an effect on the outcomes of games. I hate to break that to everybody, but again, you do you, man. And if you think it does, and you're superstitious, whatever, by all means, do your thing.
Wait, you're telling me I've been wearing the same underwear since our bowl win for no reason?
Yeah, that's
all right. I guess I'll change it.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
But there's now, I think, more reason for you to see positives, I guess, from non-conference success. I think we see this in basketball. I mean, were you rooting for Kansas last year in November and December? No, but their net was off the charts good because of how much damage they did in November and December against the who's who of the sport. And then they got injured and the wheels kind of fell off a little bit, and then you beat them. And boy, your resume all of a sudden has a couple arrows pointing up just because of the data. So that's what I'm just trying to point out. I'm not saying that you root for whoever you want, but there's now more reasons for you to be, I don't know, more excited about your league doing better in the non-conference than before, when you were kind of, I don't know, maybe rooting against, or you took pleasure in some of the failures of upsets here or there. So that's all I guess I'm trying to point out. Now, as far as the Texas Tech win total, I think it's fair. I think that you are in that meaty middle. That's where you're going to be picked, in my opinion. I have a hard time thinking that you're going to be much higher than 5th or 6th, and I bet you're more listed around the 7th and 8th and 9th territory when you look at where they're picked to finish. But there's going to be a lot of ties and a lot of beating up on each other. Because this was the good part about the graphic as I look at it. If you're selling the brand of Big 12 football and meaningful football, you're going to get entertainment and probably not many or a lot of, I guess it depends on how you want to look at this, a lot of surprises or not many surprises on every Saturday, throughout the fall, because everybody is so similar. And I think that makes for a fun brand and a fun, to tune in well into November when the conference hasn't even come close to being decided yet. And the 10th place preseason team beating the first place preseason team is not an upset. So in some ways, trying to sell that, I don't know what that's worth, or is it better to have the no-brainers, the blue bloods, and all that? And we kind of see where the population and the ratings and all that kind of land on. But there's some positives there on it being so lumped up that it's an exciting brand of football. You're not real sure what you're going to get week in and week out, and that makes for a fun, conference race. However, it may cost you, the beating up on everybody may cost you more than getting more than one member into the playoff and all that, which that's tangible, that's inclusion, that's revenue, that's all kinds of things, for fear that they take it away from you, or fear that, hey man, they haven't earned the right to get more than one in here. They're just, it's all average. So everybody's all over the map there, but I hope Tech goes over. But it's pretty fascinating to look at that total graphic and see kind of where everybody, how much meaty middle there is.
I'm glad you mentioned the word brand, because this is one thing I'm very curious to discover for the new Big 12 and also in this expanded playoff era. Previously, by virtue of flaws in the system, which was a committee making selections on 4 spots, if it was not a brand name at the top of the league, then obviously you were hurt by it. If it was K-State, if it was Oklahoma State, if it was Texas Christian, if it was Baylor winning the league or being near the top, league stunk. If it's Texas, if it's Oklahoma, oh, what a league. This champion is one of the best in the country. Now, previously, when you only had 4 spots up for grabs, and again, you're deferring to men in suits in a committee room, well, human instinct is going to be to think, I suppose, that those brands are always going to be more deserving or more validated as a conference champion or as a team that had like a 1-loss season or something than the others. Is it right? I certainly don't think so, but we know the nature of the beast. And that's why for so long, Chris, I've really wanted to err on the side of more inclusion within the college football postseason, because you're not going to get it right. And you're not going to view things in a fair or reasonable kind of way all the time. You're not going to look at a Texas Christian team the same way as you would look at a Texas team with the same record, even when they were in the same league. It's just, I don't know why, but folks are beholden to those brands. So I'm really curious. Like, I know the expanded playoff will alleviate that a little bit because you got to fill 12 spots. So clearly it's not always going to be 12 top brands or 12 blue bloods. There's not even 12 blue bloods that exist. There's, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7. But it's not always going to be that way. So you're going to have some that have to be placed in there. So that'll alleviate it to a certain extent. But I guess I'm wondering, in the Big 12 conference, who's the one with the logo on the side of their helmet that almost needs to win it for someone to view the league? Like, is it Utah? I don't even know. I don't know that there is one, I guess, that fits that description.
First, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, and it's do or die time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, player props, money lines, and a whole lot more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
I don't think that exists. I just don't. And that's why I think non-conference success and continuing to commit to facilities and just athletics in general, I think is important for just the league to remain, and we got into the private equity and the naming rights and all those things. It's funny too, because Calvin, I think people view the lack of revenue comparatively as a weakness, where the Big 12, there's an old saying about sometimes your biggest weaknesses can be your biggest strengths, depending on how you view it. Where the Big 12 is so much better is that I think you're more creative in this league. Football-wise, I think that in many ways the coaching in football and basketball is better than in some of those other leagues, certainly. They just always trump you on our personnel's better.
Yeah.
The end.
Pretty big deal. But
we don't have to get creative with our schemes or this or that, because we just, line up and we run power I or whatever. And we're gonna maul you. Where I think you are better, though, is you've had to get creative. You had to have coached better, developed better. There's nobody in this league necessarily buying teams and things like that. Now, we've seen some of that big money get spilled over into basketball, certainly. But I think that but to allow yourself to continue to do that, and so your coaches don't get plucked, and you have to win big, and you have to continue to invest and then hold on to. That's the other thing. You don't want your golden goose here, and that you've not that Chris Kleiman or a Joey McGuire or a insert whoever's name in the league is going to get plucked, but that's what your biggest assets are, and what you've invested in to make them your biggest assets are what makes them special, and you want to make sure that you don't lose some of that. So I don't exactly know where I was going with that, but bottom line is somebody needs to win and win big, and really it's plural. Yeah. It needs to be shared, and that's why in some ways you kind of have to roll your sleeves up and go, okay, I'll root for, or it was good that so and so won. And a couple of years ago, it was extremely painful for me watching Mac, like watching TCU do their thing. But here we
through prayer and discipline, maybe we can see this growth in our own lives. So something for you to ponder as we get nearer to this 2024 season. Can't wait for so much of this to be revealed, at least for one go round, with who will rise to the top, what cream there will be in the Big 12 as far as some newcomers or not. And we'll begin to find out, obviously, as we get into August and September. So looking forward to that, and looking forward to another go around tomorrow. Chris, appreciate your time as always, man. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Keep hope alive, people. We'll talk to you on the flip side.
And subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks for being out there. And remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to comment anything below. So dive into that YouTube dust up. We love those that do regularly. And hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.